listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Janelle Elgoway.
Good evening and welcome to the Doctor's Corner on Caw 360 Network. I'm your host, Janelle Elgoway, along with Dr. Kline. Welcome, Dr. Kline. How are you this evening?
I'm just dandy, just fiddling with the mute button, trying to embrace the new technology. But here I am, ready to go.
Okay. Tonight we're going to focus on doctors as healers or scapegoats. If you have questions or comments for Dr. Kline, please call into the show at 415-915-2291. You can also chat live with our audience on our YouTube channel, Conspiracies Against Wellness livestream. So tonight we're talking about scapegoats and healers. Is doctors one or the other, both, or how are you thinking of this?
Well, the question is you've got to pick one or the other. You're going to be a doctor and stand up for what you believe and your principles that go back a long way. The Hippocratic Oath was interesting in that it was the first oath of any kind that set professional standards. So it really carries over to all the professions, where all the professions have standards. You have standards if you're a politician, if you're a dentist, if you're a lawyer, if you're an architect. So our profession goes back to ancient Greece, and generally over the years, doctors have chosen the healing role. Occasionally, they get swept up in history, and we had some bad examples of that in Germany and other countries. We had bad examples in this country with sterilization of people who were developmentally delayed. So you got to decide, if you're going to be a scapegoat or a goat, then you've got to decide that's the role you're going to take. And a lot of physicians have taken that. Mm-hmm. There's even a more ominous story about goats, and that's in India, where they have tigers.
Okay.
And so the farmers, when they go out in the field, they go out with a goat, and the goat goes first. So if there's a tiger, the tiger eats the goat and not the farmer.
Right.
So we have been kind of in that bad position. If you don't play ball, you're going to get the DEA on your case. But why is this? Well, we have to go back to Henry Anslinger. Mm-hmm. Remember him? 1930 to 1962, 32 years, he was the commissioner of the Narcotics Division of the Treasury Department. He purposely locked up doctors. As an example, one physician by the name of Lawrence, his brother, who was also a physician, came to personally plead with Anslinger about releasing his brother from prison because he hadn't done anything. Anslinger refused, and after the doctor walked out of the room, Anslinger was quoted as saying, "Doctors really cannot treat addicts, even if they wish to." Instead, he called for tough judges, not afraid to throw killer pushers into prison and throw away the key. He considered physicians to be killer pushers. Now, the DEA publishes every year a little document called Cases Against Doctors every year. Mm-hmm. And in 2016, there were 260 cases listed. Majority of them do not go to trial, but I'll just give you some examples. This doctor was plea bargained for prescribing controlled substances to drug-dependent individuals. That's addicts. This guy was treating addicts. God forbid. How horrible is that? In Canada, of course, you can treat addicts. In all the other countries in the world, you can treat addicts, but it's against the law in this country. He paid a $30,000 fine, and guess what his prison term was?
What was that?
14 years.
Wow.
This particular physician was convicted of money laundering. That means he took cash. So any doctor that takes cash on the visits is money laundering. He intentionally distributed to several individuals. So he did the wrong thing. He was giving out drugs to several individuals. 63 months in federal prison.
Wow.
This fellow plea bargained. He gave 500 units of hydrocodone. That means 500 pills. 500 pills is about a month's worth because we have to give these pills every 4 hours and sometimes 1 or 2. So 500 is a month's supply, basically. Mm-hmm. And he prescribed them to an informant in exchange for cash.
Okay.
So he was placed on home detention for 6 months and through probation, which means he couldn't practice during that period of time. These are the types of cases. It's here's another fellow, unlicensed treatment of drug addiction. So he was treating a drug addict. Mm-hmm. Six months house arrest. These are the kinds of crimes. When you thumb through this, you can get it online. Cases against doctors by the DEA, and thumb through it, and see what you think. This fellow wrote a prescription for 19 people. 19 people did the wrong thing. 19 people. 10 years in federal prison.
Wow. Let me ask you something. Why is it important that the general public know this information?
Well, I think that we need to understand, you've heard me on this show before, I don't always defend doctors. Mm-hmm. But this really is a serious problem because when a physician goes to prison, he doesn't have any patients anymore. So all the patients in his practice don't have a doctor.
Right.
We had one example, the case we discussed last week. As soon as the physician was accused of prescribing too much, the hospital red flagged all of his patients.
Wow.
So if they showed up in the emergency room or something, no pain medicine for you, ever. So we need to understand that physicians and patients need to work together, mm-hmm. that there are crooks out there. The DEA pulls 35 licenses a year for crooks. And there's 600 a year that are, quote, surrendered, like pleading guilty, surrendered license here, the ones I just read you. Doctors are frightened because of these huge sentences. No physician wants to leave his family for 10 years with no money and go to prison for 10 years because he did the wrong thing and prescribed to 17 people. God forbid. I mean, that's, what a heinous crime. Mm-hmm. It's wrong. He should have gotten some punishment, had his license suspended for 6 months or something. But 10 years in prison?
Yeah.
But this has been going on since Anslinger. And I want people to know this because when they hear stories about the doctor down the street was raided by the DEA, don't assume they're guilty. Because in my review of these 260 cases, it looks to me, I haven't counted them up, it looks to me like a very small percentage were actually crooks. And all the rest did something wrong, like, for example, trying to treat an addict. Isn't that awful, just treating an addict? What is wrong with treating an addict?
Well, I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that. I mean, they're sick just like somebody that has... a disease, a regular disease that, that's what they have, right?
And if you give them prescription drugs, they're going to be a lot safer because they know the number of milligrams. If people are not stupid, they know the number of milligrams, or else they go out on the street and purchase fentanyl mixed up with heroin mixed up, and they have no idea what they're getting.
Right.
But they must get something. We have to understand that about serious opioid addiction, what we call type B addiction, the real serious one, mm-hmm. That they're going to continue looking for things. You can hide all the medicine you want, take it out of all the medicine cabinets you want, and not give them medicine in the emergency room. And And DEA can shrink up the supply, which is, by the way, is now affecting my patients. They're having to go to the pharmacy to get partial refills. Now they're being told they can only do it twice, so they're going to end up without their supply for the month. This is the DEA controlling the supply, as if this is somehow going to just tell all the addicted people, oh, no problem, I'll just quit. Now, if they were addiction A, this is where the confusion is. Addiction A is choice, it's marijuana, cocaine. These are things you don't withdraw from, and you can just choose to stop them. So the lecturing about why don't you just stop applies to addiction A. Some people call it psychological addiction. It really is biochemical, but it's a different kind. It doesn't have a withdrawal. Versus the much more serious addiction B, which is your typical junkie, who is going to find stuff no matter what, and is going to steal to get it. Type A addiction, they don't run around stealing to get more marijuana. You know, they may sell it and do illegal things, but they're different addictions, and we shouldn't confuse them.
Now, is there a lot of research out there on this? Because I'm aware of not even some doctors know about that. How come? What's going on there with that?
Well, I just put two and two together after reading an awful lot of papers, and things that were inconsistent.
Okay.
For example, everybody says there's more addiction. This is not true. I can't find this anywhere. There's more overdose deaths in the addiction community, but not more addictions. The government claims that we have 2 million addicts, or 2 million people with substance abuse disorder. That's not addiction. Addiction is, intense seeking without consequences, without paying attention to consequences. Substance abuse disorder is done by the government survey. They go around to people's homes and they say, do you ever take more than you're supposed to of your prescription opioids? Well, most people say yes, because actually they should be doing that. They should be varying their dose, according to how bad their pain is. So the answer, yes, truthfully. And oops, that's a substance abuse disorder. Well, supposedly there's 2 million of these people. Probably the true figure is a quarter of that. But anyway, take that as the figure, divide it by the population of 320 million, and you get 4 people, 5 people per 1,000 who have substance abuse disorder. Well, if you pretend like all of those people have type B addiction, not type A, type B addiction, serious opioid addiction, that's only 1 in 250 people. And we've said before that's the same rate that's been ever since 1920. So physicians are taken to jail because they are the new goats. They are responsible for the addiction. Presumably without the doctors writing for pain medicine, there would be no addiction. Doctors don't have anything to do with addiction. 90% of addiction occurs in high school. 80% of those, they get their first dose at a party, not from doctors. It's actually very rare to start an addiction. And as we mentioned before, it can happen, and doctors just simply need to ask if they've ever taken an opiate before. But understand what the doctors are afraid of. They're afraid of what I just went over. 10 years in prison. One female doctor gave her husband a prescription for hydrocodone. 6 months in federal penitentiary.
Wow.
So, we need to understand where we're coming from as doctors, and also to try to get at the basics of what is going on. Let me tell you, everything that the government is basing its programs on, hunting of doctors, cutting back people on medicine, is not based on fact. None of it. So part of the problem is fear amongst the general population. And so we are interested tonight to hear from people to address their fears. What are you afraid of? And I will answer as honestly as possible. You don't have to give your name or your area code if you don't want to, but I want to help get this on a positive scale, and we can't do it without people in the street, the general population. People with pain disease kind of understand what's going on, but it's the people without the pain disease that are afraid that their teenagers are going to die as a heroin addict. They're afraid of what the consequences would be of having addicts in the neighborhood, you know. So those are the kinds of fears that we would like to address tonight. And these same fears affect us as doctors in a very serious manner. And if we start to understand what's behind these fears, it might lighten the problem for everybody. Mm-hmm. So
I have a quote for you from Dr. Perofsky. They said, "When disease strikes and humans suffer, the need to understand why is very powerful, and unfortunately, identification of a scapegoat is sometimes inevitable." Why do you think doctors have become scapegoats in the United States?
Well, the physicians have, in the United States, have had kind of a paternal/maternalistic approach to things. You do what I say or you're going to die. And doctors need to learn to stop doing that. I mean, I got a guy who comes and looks at my furnace, and he doesn't say, you know, if you don't do what I say, your house is going to burn down. Mm-hmm. You know, in other words, you get advice and then people make their own decisions. And physicians really have not done a good job with that. And they need to be consultants like my auto mechanic. I went the other day and asked him about my brakes. And, you know, he said, you got to do this. And I said, why do I got to do that? And blah, blah, blah. He didn't say, if you don't fix your brakes, you're going to be dead. Or I'm not going to like you anymore. Or don't come back here ever again. So we need to kind of fix that, and people need to start having adult-to-adult conversations with their doctor. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that doctors are going to resist, but too bad. You know, we need to start having real conversations so that people can feel and say, you know, doctor, I'm afraid my teenager is going to become an addict and be dead. You know, that's what I'm worried about. So then we need to provide good explanations, honest explanations to people, and figure out what we're going to do. About 90% of addiction starts in teenage years.
Yeah.
Now, they write articles and say, oh, it's because their brain is, you know, not ready yet. Oh, that's nonsense. Teenagers are biological. Adults and their brains are just fine. What happens is that's when you're first exposed to opiates. So when you're also first exposed to weed and cocaine, but those don't lead to serious, lethal, fatal addictions like an addiction B in opioid addiction. So we want to answer questions that anybody has, questions you've been afraid to ask. Mm-hmm. And I would like an answer. If I don't know the answer, I'll just make up something. No.
Yeah, and just a reminder, the phone number to call in to ask questions is, again, 415-915-2291. So this may sound like a silly question, but who do you think earns more per hour? An experienced teacher with an undergraduate degree, an auto worker with a high school diploma, or a family doctor?
Auto worker.
Okay, so in Canada, the average family doctor makes $210,000 a year, and then half goes to expenses like office rent, receptionist, nurse, medical equipment, etc. Once benefits are factored in, a family doctor earns about the same as a teacher and an auto worker in most provinces in Canada. I was actually really surprised to hear that. But if you think about it, also how much time between school, you know, the hours and all of that, and then on top of it, you're dealing with like lives. And I understand there's other professions with that as well, but go ahead.
Well, a lot of doctors don't want to be doctors anymore, and here's part of it, the stuff we're talking about today, you know, having the federal drug police lurking around your building, sending in informants, trying to trick you so they can rack up another arrest and get their budgets up. By the way, Henry Anslinger started out with no budget. He started making up these lies to get his budget increased. Everybody became so frightened of Negroes, as he called them, of Chinese people, of Mexican immigrants, that he got funded. Oh, protect us! Oh my God! This is terrible. Get these drugs out of here. Just if you get rid of the drugs, we're not going to have any more crime.
Yeah.
So an average family practitioner is on the low end of the scale. Pediatricians are too. General practitioners, because we don't do any procedures. People that do endoscopies and stuff get $1,000 a crack, or they read echocardiograms, $250, it's 5 minutes. But the folks that run in offices on the front line really aren't that rich.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we have a caller. Caller, welcome to the Doctor's Corner. What's your question for Dr. Kline?
Hey, I'm Dr. Kline. This is Jessica, and I'm calling out of Charlotte, and I have one question for you. I am constantly fighting with the insurance companies over the CDC guidelines, and I'm scared I'm going to go too far, and they're not going to cover any of my medicine. I don't know if they can kick me off completely, because I've questioned it to the point where I've been on hold for a supervisor for probably about an hour and a half, and they wouldn't put anyone on because I was like, you're following CDC guidelines. A guy outright said it. He said, I'm following CDC guidelines. I said, but that's not the law. That's not the way that it is. The FDA.
Well, you can always go to the insurance commissioner in the state. Okay. I don't know how it works in North Carolina. And you need to move away from the insurance company. You're going to waste your time arguing with them, because they're not going to give up, based on you calling. So just don't call them up anymore. But file a complaint with the insurance commissioner here in North Carolina and see what they do. I'll be interested in hearing.
Okay. All right. Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Right. Most people become doctors because of their genuine commitment to medicine and helping others. Do you believe our government uses the why doctor became a doctor to hold doctors as hostage because they're reluctant to hold their patients hostage?
Yeah, doctors are guilt-ridden always, because they always feel responsible for people's health, which is another mistake, by the way. Doctors are not responsible.
Okay.
Well, doctors are not responsible for other people's health. They can help out and try to fix other people's health. But if people don't do what they say, then the physicians start to feel responsible. Well, you're sick because you didn't do what I said. And then they start feeling guilty, that, they didn't do what I said, and now they're worse. This is a bad trait for doctors to have. We need to be professional advisors, just like any other advice people seek, like lawyers, like, dentists. So, I think that helps put them in a weak position when the DEA goes in to arrest the doctor doesn't drop down behind his desk and pull out guns.
Right.
Like most criminals. And actually, a lot of them are cowed into signing away their licenses, as we've talked about before. So, yeah, they are taken advantage of. There's no two ways about it.
Yeah. Something I think about, too, is before I even got into all of this, I had a certain idea of doctors, and a certain respect, because I see a white coat and instantly I felt a certain way. But I'm just wondering, do we all kind of have to start, now that I talk to you and, several others, I'm more comfortable and I feel like, you guys are just people too. But for some reason, I didn't think that in my mind. Do you think a lot of people feel that way? And do we all, because, there's a certain stereotype about doctors of how they feel about patients too. You know what I mean? About, I don't know how to.
No, that's quite true. I knew a family practice group in south of Boston where I practiced, and once a month they'd have a meeting, a dinner meeting, and they would invite their patients.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, for just kind of regular old discussions about what's going on. That's the way it should be. Doctors, I mean, I respect my auto mechanic.
Right.
I mean, I go in there with my car, you know, that's 20 years old, and say, you know, it's not running right. And they try to figure it out. They have to make a diagnosis. They got 59 million different varieties of cars to look at, and they're usually right. So I respect them. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean you have to put people on pedestals.
Right.
And that they're all knowing, all seeing. You know, for example, people feel funny when a doctor says, let me look it up. That's really not helping us as doctors. Doctors that look up things are not making up something they don't know. So that's really good.
Yeah, I'd rather that.
In other words, you know, I mean, we prescribe hundreds of different medications, you know, so sure, there's a bunch of them we know pretty well, but every once in a while we come across one that we say haven't prescribed in 2 or 3 months, so we flip through the book and look it up and check out the side effects and read them to somebody and, you know, check on the dose. But there's nothing wrong with that. I go to my auto mechanic and he's there at the computer looking up my car, you know, trying to figure out what's wrong with it. So we need to have the same respect that you have for anyone that you're paying money to get advice. And no matter how you cut it, you are still paying the doctor.
Yeah.
It goes through a third party, but you're still paying a doctor. So that's quid pro quo in business. And that means, you know, you give the doctor an ear to listen, and then you decide as the person whether or not to take the advice. And doctors need to be grown up and say, well, you know, maybe you're right. It's been amazing to me over 40 years of how many times patients have been right, you know, and so I give them my best shot, you know, which is maybe 90%. But then there are individual cases, and they may say, you know, I think I would rather do this. That's fine. Mm-hmm. But doctors aren't catching on to that. Doctors need to learn to do that if they want people to support them. You know, like when it comes to these horrors of the federal drug police, there was another case, by the way, the Board of Registration of Medicine is another horror. There was a fellow in Virginia that treated an addict. His license was permanently taken away without a hearing. I think we mentioned that before.
And because he treated an addict?
Because he treated an addict. It's illegal in the United States to treat an addict without a federal license.
Okay.
You know, like I said, in Canada, it's perfectly legal. Somebody comes in the office. And the other thing I just tweeted about today was, you know, how can doctors tell the difference between an addict and a person in pain? Well, you close the door and you say, look, it looks to me like you may have some problems with this medicine. I'm not going to turn you in. Why don't we talk about whether or not you're having serious problems with these medicines? Mm-hmm. And then you can bring up the fact that, do you feel like you're hooked or addicted? And if you are, then we can offer you this medicine as a treatment and this program and blah, 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 blah. Now, doctors are just flummoxed. They have no idea what to do. Well, you just ask.
Well, this is the other thing, though, because I think patients, because I would feel this way. I'm scared when I go in every time to the doctors now, you know, at times. But I feel like instead of doctors, you know, going to be there to help, I'm afraid that they're going to look at me and say, okay, so you're this way, and then they're going to treat me a certain way. And I know a lot of others feel that way. How do we get through that? And how do we get, I mean, is that true?
Well, what happens if, you know, somebody comes up to you on a street corner and steps on your foot on purpose?
Right.
You know, you do the adult thing. You say, hey, Jack, what are you doing? You know, what's going on there? The same thing with doctors. They need to start hearing adult responses. Doctor, I look a little nervous today, and I'm nervous because I'm afraid you're going to categorize me unfairly. Mm-hmm. You know, one person tweeted and they said, you know, they go into their doctor and they say, look, doc, I'm just here drug seeking. You know,
yeah,
a little humor can go a long way, but you just have to look them in the eye and say, doctor, this is really making me uncomfortable because you're assuming that I'm lying to you. Do you really think I am purposely lying to you?
Yeah.
Do you think that I'm really drug seeking? You know, in other words, you just have to come back with adult conversation. And doctors, because they're used to being put on pedestals, as you pointed out, you know, are liable to get huffy and stuff. And then you can say, well, doctor, you know, I think getting huffy about this is really childish. Now, they may discharge you from the practice and really get huffy, but then you file a complaint against them.
Right.
You say, I was trying to have a conversation with this doctor, and now I'm kicked out of the practice? I mean, what's going on here? And this is a good time to get your lawyer, who you've retained by getting a will made. You know, a single call from a lawyer, believe me, goes a long way. You know, gee, doctor, I hear you discharged my client here because she spoke up to you and said she was nervous and that she didn't like the way you were claiming that she was a drug seeker. You know, I mean, you just got to fight back. You can't let them do that. You know, if my auto mechanic, every time I came in there, he says, oh, I see you're bringing your junker back. You know, well, I do have a junker, but he doesn't say that, you know?
Right.
And if he did, I would be insulted, and I would say, you know, I'm sorry, I love my car. And so he doesn't say it, you know, because he's grown up. You know, doctors suffer from not being grown up. And that's because, as we've mentioned before, they go into school when they're 18, they don't come out until they're 30. And so that whole part of your development is suspended. You know, so the way to fix that is, what do you do with some smart mouth teenager? You know, George, we don't say that here in our family. You know, you just have to. You kind of just have to do people do put their pants on one leg at a time in the morning, right? You know, or slacks, and you know.
Well, that's why. Yeah, that's why I mentioned that. You know, you guys are human too, and I think sometimes. I mean, I forget it. So, we have a call. Caller, welcome to the Doctor's Corner. What's your question for Dr. Kline?
Hey, this is not Jessica again.
Hi.
Kidding, it really is. Okay. So that actually just touched base on what I was thinking about, and I've been talking to multiple people this week about doing a rally, and I've talked to 3 different people who have been terrified to actually speak to a doctor and say that their medication was not enough because they're being undertreated, or that their needs have changed. And I personally went through that myself. You know, like, I have to watch it now because I can overdo myself easily when I'm not feeling as much pain. You know, you try to catch up on all that work that's, you know, in the background. But, I mean, how do people, I'm more worried about the people that they can't talk to their doctors and say, look, this isn't working for me. I need to go up, or something needs to change. What's the best way for them to talk? Because I know that there are people who have been thrown out of clinics. I've talked to 4 people yesterday who had been thrown out of clinics because of that. They were labeled as drug seekers.
Well, you know, what
can they do?
Yeah, right now we're in the same position as African Americans were in the 1950s and 60s. You have no protection. So what do? You link arms. You never go to the doctor alone.
That's a good point.
You take some burly person with you, or you take 2 people with you. Now, some offices will say, you know, you can't bring other people in. And in which case, you just say, well, why don't you reschedule an appointment at a time when I can bring people in? You just got to put your money on the line. You know, when people refuse to sit in the back of the bus, guess what? They were afraid to get arrested. And guess what? They did get arrested. So, in other words, you may lose your doctor, and you have to factor that in, you know. And if you got a doctor that's stringing you along on a little bit of medicine and it's helping you, then you may just want to back off, you know, and just take what you can get. And it's very hard to leave a practice needing pain medicine and find another doctor, you know. I mean, right now it's just horrible. You know, I've got one person that's called 30 different people, you know, and this is something we're going to try to go public with, you know. So, you know, you do have to kind of weigh that. And, you know, and if you're really in a bad pickle, then you just got to shut up and do other things, like you say, having rallies and stuff. I saw a rally the other day for another cause. 6 people were carrying signs. It hit all the newspapers in the U.S., you know, and I forgot what their issue was. It didn't have to do with pain, but it was a small issue. But 6 of them, there they are, all over the newspapers, you know.
Do you know how they got in all of them? Do you know how they got in all of those?
Well, you know, one person takes a photo and then they put it out on the wires, and people can pay $25 in another newspaper and pay for their photograph. And it's the editors all sit around going, "Whoa, this will look good in our newspaper." People, you know, people carrying signs makes the news. But I understand that people are afraid, you know, they're going to be labeled as taking medicines. But, you know, you can take people along and make a sign. I support my sister, who's not here, you know. You know, you can figure clever ways around that. But I'll tell you, carrying signs goes a long way, and nobody's really done it. You know, I always picture, and I'll join in, you know. I'm here in Raleigh. I'll carry a sign, you know, out in front of some hospital, you know. Hospital won't give pain medicine to pain patients. Back to the dark ages. Well, you know, I mean, signs are wonderful.
Go ahead.
Not to interrupt you, but there is a pain rally coming up, and it's called Don't Punish Pain, and it's on September 18th. It's a national pain rally. I already have 40 people in North Carolina that will be protesting in different cities. So we're trying to do it around the same time. In Charlotte, we're going to be protesting CMC Maine. So.
And think of the folks, you know,
we're trying to do it.
Think of the African American folks and what they went through in the 1950s and 60s. They got out there with signs and they turned dogs loose on them. They turned fire hoses loose on them. You know, it's really an example of courage. And if you're going to be courageous, you got to realize that some bad stuff might happen, you know. They might try to arrest you. That's why you have to get a, you know, police permit and everything. It's usually you won't get arrested, but you know, people will start screaming at you, and you know who knows?
You know, when I went to go start this show, even I really sat down and thought for a while, should I do this? Because I was so afraid that my care would get interrupted, and I've had a few issues along the way, you know, that happened with doctors and stuff like that, or you know, my medical stuff, but. This is the thing I came to. If I'm not going to stand up, why should I ask anybody else to stand up for me? And the thing is this issue is just so big. We need every person, everybody. We need the sick, the healthy, everyone. Doctors, not doctors, you know. And until people realize that, and like Dr. Kline just said, you know, start linking together, it's going to be really, really difficult. And I mean, the longer it takes us to do it, the longer it's going to be. So
the other good thing about protesting is that people are afraid of people who go public. So when you go public, you're actually more protected. I heard a story of some I heard a story of some woman who went public, and she said every time she was in her doctor's office, they were running around like she was the queen. Afraid she was going to take off after them, you know. And so usually it works out okay, but you always take a little bit of a chance that things will backfire. But, you know, if you go to your doctor and he says, I saw you on television, usually that's good, you know, because the physician is on notice that you're aggressive and an activist.
We have to fight for our kids, you know?
Yeah. You know, and
this isn't just us.
Well, and another point, that's a good point, actually, Dr. Kline. Another thing is you know, something I did in the beginning is I said, I work with this group and I work with that group. And this is what I was saying to, not publicly, you know, on here, but like to doctors or whatever, just so they would know, you know, so they would kind of know that I'm not by myself. So... yeah, it's been good, and I think people would be pleasantly surprised, you know, if we all started to come together and be united like as one voice. So.
Well, that's what we're going to do. And if things see people like you guys, I mean, we're going to be completely honest, I haven't had the courage to really speak out because I was scared that I would have someone target me. But thank you to you guys, and we're just going to stand tall because they're not going to do this to my babies. What they've done to me, they will never do this to my children.
You know,
that's hang up now.
Yeah, that's an important thing. You know, we're not talking about now. We're talking about my grandchildren going to the emergency room and not getting any medicine, you know, or if one of my grandchildren develops one of these horrid diseases, you know. I mean, what are you going to just let them go to a cave and roll around and suffer? You know, good God. So, yeah, there is an investment in the future. I mean, these things are in there for the long haul, and it's going to be very difficult to turn it around, but it's possible.
Are you still there?
Yep.
Well, you are. I guess our caller came off. Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I wanted to go back to scapegoating for a second here. There's this blog I was looking up. It's called Dr. Scapegoat. And in it, he said, scapegoating is a natural process nurtured in group anxiety and dysfunction. It's also a first step in group transformation. At the end of a scapegoating process, some fundamental realities will change. And he was talking about in group settings, but can this be applied to on a bigger level, like our country?
Sure.
Okay. So are we in the middle of a transformation?
We do make transformations. You know, we stopped sending pregnant young women from high school up to Pennsylvania to their grandmothers, you know, and kicked them out of school. You know, and we stop being afraid of people who are gay or lesbian. We stop being afraid of HIV, that the person next door with HIV is not going to infect our children, and is not a sexual predator just because they have HIV. You know, all this has come along, you know, and now we see gay folks, good Lord, you know, they're mayors, governors, and who knows, you know, that's wonderful. And we can do the same thing with pain. It's entrenched. You know, it's about as deeply entrenched as our fears of African Americans, our oldest citizens. Our oldest families in this country are African American. They're the original Americans. So, you know, they've been through a lot, and folks with Islamic belief, I mean, they're still goats, and eventually that's going to come around. So, yeah, you just got to do it, and it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of telling yourself that this will work.
Yeah.
Even though you believe it won't work, it will work. This agenda of prosecution of doctors and pain patients is only led by a few people. And it's also encouraged by the general population. That's why we would like to speak to the general population to alleviate fears that people have by asking questions and obtaining information about primal fears of people with addiction disease. So anybody that wants to call in and ask an embarrassing question, you can do so confidentially. So,
you know, and something would be interesting is if we could find someone, you know, during the civil rights movement, if we could have them actually on to hear, especially if they're higher up levels, to hear how they dealt with it. What did they do? How did they pull it together?
Yep, great idea.
Yeah, that would be so.
You know, there's an interesting story. You know, there was always a senior person in the movement, it was called, in all towns and cities and precincts. Only nobody knew who it was because they were afraid too.
Okay.
You know, of arrests and being taken out of the woods and murdered. So somebody that was in that position as a community leader, you know, probably be in their 80s now, but it would be wonderful to hear from them. And I've actually been seeking and asking folks if they could find someone, because I would imagine people from the movement have a lot of tricks, that we could learn from,
right,
about how do you change terrible, entrenched public opinion.
Yeah. I got a private message. Somebody wanted to know, does it matter what you put on your signs if you're at rallies?
Nope. Doesn't matter. That's freedom of the First Amendment. Well, you can put anything you want on there.
No. I think what they mean is is there a specific message that you should have? Is there something that is positive and that wouldn't work as well?
No, I think that's the beauty of signs. It's the beauty of political cartoonists. You want to be real straightforward. And, you can put on there whatever you want. Hospital unfair to emergency room patients. Doctors unfair to patients with painful disease. Opiates are not the enemy.
What about, I know when we were in D.C., they had a hashtag patients not addicts. Is that good?
That's wonderful. Yeah, okay. Sure. And this is when people can get creative. You got your sign there, and you can just put on there anything you want. And it's funny, when you look at signs in rallies, some of them are pretty clever.
Yeah.
So go for it. Yeah. Put some pointed messages on there, messages that people will look and understand, pain patients, not addicts. That's wonderful. That's a great idea.
Are doctors coming together at all that you know of?
Nope. Well, in British Columbia, in the Canadian province, we spoke of this last time, but the physicians got together with patient advocacy groups and said, you know what, we're in the same boat. We don't like being told this is not true. It's not based on fact. What is this? High doses of opiates don't cause any problems. I'm sorry, people can say that. The FDA already ruled that there is no such thing as a cutoff, because if you have a cutoff, it assumes everything below that is safe.
Okay.
That was their logic. And that made really good sense. And they were saying not only the 90 milligram, but any kind of cutoff you make up gives the false impression. So, I don't think doctors really like this at all. A lot of them feel like they're going to lose their jobs and are being threatened. But, in British Columbia, they got together. I do not know of any folks here. I've heard some rumors that, I forget, maybe Arizona or something, they're renegotiating pain treatment contracts, and they're going to be more favorable. So we need to get the doctors together, but doctors are funny animals. They really are. They don't call up one another, and commiserate unless you really know the person real well. Doctors don't socialize very much, so they don't have a chance to get out at the barbecue and, complain to their fellows and say, hatch a plot. My wife and I just stayed at Reynolds Tavern in Annapolis. Been there since 1745, and they all sat around in there hatching the plots. You get together and you hatch plots. Doctors need to get together, but they don't have time. They don't socialize. They don't. Have barbecues. If they're working for somebody else, they never sponsor anything. Just bring us the money and go home.
Right.
But that's not. Come on. That's just going to be whiny and nothing I can do about it. Good grief.
I was just reading the definition of scapegoat, and it's one that bears the blame for others or one that is the object of irrational hostility.
That's pretty close.
Yeah. It sounds like all of us, doctors, patients, everyone.
Yeah, patients are all a bunch of addicts. Ye gods, what are you going to do next? Kill me?
Yeah.
You swallow the opium pill and what they used to call them, opium eaters. You swallow the heroin pill, and hey, it's any minute you're going to turn into a witch and go around and you're going to infect other people. And geez, you just give out these medicines. My God, everybody in the country is going to be addicted.
Yeah.
They give out this many prescriptions. Everybody should be addicted, right, by now.
Right.
If that's true, I don't see my neighbors shooting up and stuff, and they've all had opiates for their surgery and stuff. They seem to have gotten through it okay. So it's really a lack of information, and doctors need to hear this. And I'm looking for somebody that would like to co-author a little a little maybe Kindle book or something, patient's perspective, doctor's perspective on treatment of painful disease.
I think that would be great. There has to be more out there about it. Do you know if anything, okay, so costs have gone up. Access to primary care doctors has fallen, you know, and it's hard to get into doctors now. Is there more patients than doctors can handle out there right now? And how has that changed in the last 10, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I don't have any facts on it, but it sure seems to be the case.
Right.
And also, for older people, doctors are not taking Medicare.
They're not taking
Medicare, no.
Really?
When I moved here 10 years ago, only 2 of the 5 big primary care practices took Medicare. 2 of 5.
Wow.
So that's another huge problem. You know, when you get older, not only are they going to take all your pain medicines away because you're going to be ranging the streets, you know, raping and pillaging, but you can't even get in to see a doctor at all, much less get a prescription for, you know, a couple of pills a day. I can tell you a lot of the patients, older patients I've seen, they just, a couple of Vicodin a day keeps them functional,
yeah.
You know. Helps them get up in the morning and sleep at night and deal with their bad joints. The Reverend Billy Graham, who I have much respect for as a person, in his later years said, "This sucks. I don't like this life."
Yeah.
And here's this positive guy, you know. And it was because he had arthritis. I mean, my God, I wanted to go over there to his house and say, here's some pain medicine. You know, you're going to be all right. You're not going to become addicted or die. This stuff is wonderful. It's been around 50 centuries. It has virtually no serious side effects. And yeah, 1 in 1,000 people are going to become addicted. But I'm going to tell you that that's a side effect. And you decide yourself whether you want to take it. They're handing out this $5,000 a month Humira, the new wonder drug, $30 billion in sales, most sales of any drug. It can cause you to develop leukemia, lymphoma. You can you can die from having your immune system suppressed, and the bacteria and viruses take over and kill you. But nobody's trying to, you know, tell doctors not to prescribe Humira.
Right.
You need to prescribe safely. Yes, you tell everybody the side effects. Well, same thing applies to opiates. You tell people you've got this chance of becoming addicted, and if you do, you call me. And if somebody runs a fever after taking Humira, you call me, and we'll take care of it. It's not the government coming in and saying, no more Humira. You know, you're liable to die and get leukemia. So you see, there's a very schizophrenic policy, you know,
yeah,
where we have the opiates, you know, that are created by Lucifer, and Humira that's created by, you know, drug companies. And so they're 2 different things, you know.
How long did that take to get to that point? Because, I mean, I know when, you know, OxyContin came out in 1996, and, you know, that happened. But when did it trickle down to the everyday doctor becoming, like, you know, changing how they treated patients and how they thought of pain medication?
There's been 5 drug wars. Eisenhower started one in 1950, and if you read the newspapers in 1950, sound just like the newspapers today.
They do?
The same thing, you know, big crisis in the cities. Interestingly, in New York, in the New York Times in the 1950s, they were talking about teenagers, which is really true, because 90% of addiction occurs in teenagers. So they were concerned about teenagers. So what do? Let's spend more money. Let's increase the police. Let's have more treatment and more education, none of which worked. And that's not working today. And they've added the surveillance pharmacy computers now as the new thing. And we'll talk about that at a separate session.
Okay.
But, you know, during all these drug wars, Nixon, Reagan, Bush Jr., the current president, and Eisenhower, 5 drug wars, none of them have worked. But this is the first time there's been casualties Never before have there been casualties outside of the addiction community, and it's because of Andrew Kolodny, MD, starting this, carrying it to the CDC, and getting the CDC guidelines pushed through. That's another story for another time, but believe me, he is personally responsible, as are the people at the CDC today, personally responsible for all the suffering that's going on and deaths from suicides because of their own ignorance and their own beliefs without evidence.
We have a call. Caller, welcome to the Doctor's Corner. What's your question for Dr. Kline?
It's Jesse Ray calling. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Dr. Kline, and then after I ask this, can you leave me on the page listening to the show?
Sure, absolutely.
The question that I have is, why are they terming these pain management contracts with state laws for one like myself that have been on them so long, and they're saying it's first time like we could end up addiction and even calling out potential the risk of substance use disorder.
Yeah, it's not true. And it's hard when you're in there, because if you don't sign a contract, you're not going to get any help. One of the things that I've suggested to people is try to get back into regular practices and get out of these pain management practices. You don't need to sign contracts. You don't need to do urines. That's not necessary. It's another problem created by the CDC, who has no business making any recommendations for doctors. No business. So, you can try to sell yourself to other physicians. And what I would suggest doing is you write up a little medical history, in your own words, not too long, little short paragraphs, and say, I am having a terrible time getting medical care, and that includes my pain medicine, but it also includes my general medical care, which I need, and I would like for you to consider taking me on as a patient. So you send this in ahead of time in the mail, and then you go online and you get a copy of my little piece with Carolyn Concia about palliative care, because in that it tells doctors how to bill for complex patients and make more money. I'm sorry, the world does revolve around money. And then if the physician reads your history and reads the little article on palliative care, which you can get by going to thomasklinemd.com, I'm not making any money on this. This is information only. So you send the two. You send your little history, and you send my article on palliative care. And if you want, you can send the little form that goes along with it. It's not critical. And if the physicians have time to read it ahead of time, they're going to realize that there is some advantage to seeing you, because they can charge more money. Basically, doctors can charge for the time spent when you're not there. Like, I'm on the phone all the time with insurance companies and pharmacies and pharmacy benefit managers and blah, blah, blah. I can now charge for that when you're not there. The rule used to be you can only charge when the patient was there. So that's all in the article, and it teaches physicians how that if they take you, there might be a little financial reward too, because you're a complex patient. So it's a big task, but on the other hand, just, kowtowing to these injection clinics, where a third of them don't even give out pain medicine anymore. A pain management clinic that doesn't give out pain medicine?
Yes.
Have we fallen off the rails here? Good Lord.
Yeah. Thank you, Jesse, for calling in. Go ahead.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to wrap up here because it's almost 9 o'clock. I just wanted to know what last words you had for this evening for everyone.
My last words are, try to use a new approach to getting yourself into practices, like I just suggested, with a little history about yourself. You know, when you write things yourself, the truth kind of comes through. See, it takes the suspicion away. Doctors are afraid you're just a hustler. And it's made worse by the DEA that puts undercover agents into doctors' offices.
Yeah. Trained
people to trick the doctors. You know, oh, I can just need a few until I get my X-ray. They always got a great story. And doctors, you know, I mean, we're only going to go so far. You know, we're not investigators. We're just doctors. And so then they go to prison, as I just read you one of these cases. You know, so if you present yourself ahead of time in a kind of a nice way, and the physicians have a chance to read it, and then the physician has the choice of allowing you into the practice.
Right.
And so they may give you a call. If they don't call, then you've got your package, send it to somebody else, you know, and say, I'm looking for general medical care. Here's some other problems I have. Here's some other medicines I take. In other words, I'm not just a pain patient. Right. You know, I'm a patient with lots of other issues. So I think I would really encourage people to try that. You know, it's homework. Yeah. But, you know, it's getting really bad out there, and, you know, you have to kind of sell yourself.
Yeah, that's true. Next Tuesday, you are going to be away, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so we'll have a rerun. Well, thank you so much for joining us this evening and sharing all the great information that you always share. You're awesome.
You're more than welcome, Janelle.
Yeah. All right, we'll have a great weekend. Good night.
Okay, bye-bye.
Tomorrow and the next few Wednesdays, I will be airing reruns only. And as you just heard, Dr. Kline won't be joining us next Tuesday, but I will have a rerun on next Tuesday and Wednesday as well. And then I'll let you know the following Tuesday of what we're going to be doing. Well, thank you, Call Nation, for joining us on another Tuesday evening at the Doctor's Corner. I'm Janelle Ogaway, signing off until quite a while. Have a good night.
You've been listening to The Doctor's Corner with Dr. Kline and Janelle Ogaway. Copyright 2018 by EXG LLC. All rights reserved.